Well, hello, guys. You're listening to Beauty Bytes with Dr. K, Secrets of a Plastic Surgeon, and today's podcast is a very timely one. You guys know that menopause is having a moment. Today, we're going to talk with Cynthia Thurlow, and she is a nurse practitioner. She's an author, an international speaker, and she's host of the Everyday Wellness podcast. She's written a book about to launch. It's the Menopause Gut. And this book tackles a question that so many women are asking right now, like why do we suddenly feel like the weight, the energy, mood, digestion, sleep, everything changes in midlife? So, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, Dr. K, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be with you today.
So, your new book is called The Menopause Gut. What made you feel like this is the conversation women need to be having right now?
Yeah, I think for the past 10 years, just having the privilege of being able to work with exclusively middle-aged women, there's just been questions that I haven't fully been able to answer for myself. And because I have my own podcast, I was interviewing microbiome experts and nitric oxide experts and other clinicians, both nurse practitioners and physicians. And it became clear to me that the conversation around the perimenopause to menopause transition was more than just a little bit of lifestyle mixed in with replacing hormones, although very important. And I kept thinking, if I have patients that are coming to me that are doing all the right things and they're on hormones and they're on some peptides and they're still not feeling better, then there has to be more of this conversation. And so after I would say probably the last 5 years, really looking at microbiome research, really getting detail oriented about diagnostic stool testing, really getting nuanced about the intersection between nutrigenomics and lifestyle has just afforded me this incredible privilege of being able to sit back and say, I think there's an angle to this conversation that is incredibly complementary to a lot of the incredible work that others are doing, but will be additive. And so the one thing that I have found is as I've been doing press for this book, the physicians and other NPs and researchers that have read the book were like, wow, I feel like this is the missing link. So I keep paraphrasing what I've been hearing, but I think for a lot of women, it's understanding how their physiology is changing that is equally as impactful as some of these other metrics that we focus on in midlife.
Yeah, you mentioned that the estrogen decline changes our gut microbiome, and you call that the estrobolome, if
Yeah.
I'm saying that right. How much of what women feel is in midlife is related to that shift?
I think it has a lot to do with it. I think even starting from nuanced, kind of subtle symptoms like new onset bloating, women that will tell me, I wake up in the morning and my abdomen is flat, but then when I go to bed at night, I look 6 months pregnant and I'm too old to be pregnant.
Hmm.
Individuals that are saying that they're having more brain fog, more vasomotor symptoms, and helping them understand that the microbiome is 40 trillion bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protozoa that are part of the large intestine or colon. And part of the microbiome itself is the estrobolome, which is an area in the microbiome where estrogen is effectively broken down and either eliminated or can be recirculated. But one of the kind of key things that changes in this transitional time in a woman's life is that as estrogen is declining, if our small intestine is just one cell layer thick, as estrogen is declining, if we think about it as a brick and mortar system and estrogen is the mortar, it starts to open up those tight junctions. So women will say, foods that I've always been able to eat suddenly no longer work for me because we can develop leaky gut, which will leak food particles into the bloodstream, trigger an immune response. For a lot of women, will exacerbate a lot of symptoms that they're experiencing. So just at a very basic level, early symptoms that women start reporting may precede the anxiety, the depression, the insomnia, maybe these subtle digestive symptoms that are starting sometimes in our mid to late 30s. I think for a lot of women, it's helping them understand you don't have to be in your mid 40s or late 40s for these symptoms to start. It can start much more quietly than some of these more overt symptoms that we may be more familiarized with.
That's so interesting. So, do you think maybe that contributes to mood change? Because the neuroendocrine brain and gut
Absolutely.
connection, like new
Absolutely.
microbiome, new leakage, new mood affect.
Yes, and helping women understand that if your gut is inflamed and the wonderful bidirectional relationship between the gut and the brain via the vagus nerve, very important nerve that many of us in cardiology years ago used to poo-poo if it got severed during cardiovascular surgery. Now I always say I sit back now and I kind of hold my breath and I'm like, oh my goodness, we had no idea. But the point
Mhm.
being that if 70 to 80% of our neurotransmitters are produced in the gut, that is largely dependent on the health and the vibrancy of this, invisible organ in our bodies. And so if hormones are declining and neurotransmitters are changing, that will impact the way that we perceive the world and ourselves.
So, what are some of the early signs that your gut's changing? And does this happen to everyone if you go on hormone replacement therapy right away? Are you likely to avoid it, or you're going to get some version that's lighter?
Yeah, so let me answer the first question first. I think the very subtle things that start to happen are almost imperceptible, but retrospectively, what patients will report, what I experienced were the bloating, the digestive symptoms, the brain fog, alterations in bowel habits. And this is always part of the conversation that if women are seeing alterations in bowel habits, either more diarrhea, loose stools, or constipation, we always want to make sure that we get that checked out. That can sometimes be a red flag. So that's number one. Make sure that more concerning things have been ruled out. But also helping women understand that as these hormones are declining, there are things we can do proactively, and that can be initiating hormone replacement therapy earlier. We don't have a primary indication yet, but I've said this multiple times. I do think at some point, given the expansive nature of the research, that we will get to a point where we're going to be initiating estradiol therapy earlier. We're not going to wait till women are in menopause. Certainly, I'm part of the generation where they waited for us to get really close to menopause and then we got started on HRT. I think it's going to be initiated earlier. Same thing with progesterone. But to your point, the women that I've been working with over the past 10 years, definitely the women that are on HRT have a reduction in significant symptoms. But I think perimenopause is as bio-individual as we are. Just like all of us experience puberty, some of us may have had a very uneventful puberty kind of transition, just like perimenopause. So I always say it's a litmus test. I think for women that are very high achieving, very type A, probably aren't sleeping enough, maybe aren't eating enough, or they're on the opposite end of the spectrum. Those adaptive strategies that we embrace when we're younger sometimes become maladaptive in middle age. So I think sometimes the litmus test of perimenopause is, are you doing enough to support your physiology? And so once women are sleeping more, managing their stress more effectively, eating a more nutrient dense diet, exercising, that will also translate into a healthier microbiome. And so I always remind women before you think about adding in a oral probiotic therapy, although that can be indicated depending on what we're dealing with, we need to be really dialing in on lifestyle predominantly before we even get to that point. Before we add a supplement, change your lifestyle because that will have more impact than any supplement ever will.
Hmm. You mentioned about blood sugar regulation getting difficult in midlife, and does that relate to our guts? Because we do become kind of insulin resistant and get that
Yeah,
midsection fat, the visceral fat starts.
Yeah, I remember when we made the decision to name the book The Menopause Gut. Initially, my visceral response was no way, because that's what patients complain about. And then I realized it's a double entendre. But I think the insulin resistance piece, the loss of insulin sensitivity is related to so many different issues. It's a loss of muscle mass, so the sarcopenia piece that really picks up anywhere from 3 to 8% muscle loss per decade. So that becomes more accelerated the older that we become. We also know that estradiol is a predominantly an insulin sensitizing hormone. So as that is fluctuating up and down, that also impacts insulin sensitivity. And the research is certainly suggestive that, things like short chain fatty acid production, which also declines with age, these things can impact keystone bacteria, the degree of inflammation. We know that the microbiome does play a role in insulin sensitivity. And depending on the composition of the microbiome itself, you can see alterations in caloric extraction. So you may have a metabolically unhealthy, obese individual versus a more metabolically healthy woman. And if you look at the microbiome constituency, you can actually see individuals that have a less healthy microbiome are very likely to have more inflammatory species and more issues with caloric extraction, which can translate into you're going to deal with more weight loss resistance and more visceral fat accumulation, which we know is the pathologic. It's not the pesky fat that all of us complain about in terms of subcutaneous fat. It's really the pathologic fat that's around our visceral organs that secretes inflammatory substances that can make it, creates this never-ending feedback loop where it's just perpetuating more and more inflammation, more weight loss resistance. And so I always think about how middle-aged women are in a hormonal disadvantage, but it does not mean that there are not strategies that can get us back on track in terms of our metabolic health, which I would be the first person to say that the loss of estradiol is a catastrophic event for women and why it becomes so much more important than just telling our patients it's normal to gain weight with aging. It doesn't have to be. It really needs to be a concerted effort to change our lifestyle so that we can put ourselves at an advantageous position in midlife and not where we feel like we're behind the eight ball.
I think that sometimes to make it more concrete, it's good to give examples. What is your like really great menopause diet or favorite fruits and vegetables, or what are we putting in as prebiotics into the gut that is going to help people?
Yeah, I think first the conversation really centers around protein. We know that if we're meant to maintain and build muscle mass, we actually need more protein to trigger muscle protein synthesis. So I always say concrete examples. First, track your macros because with tracking macros, we get a sense of where we are. So I typically, for my female patients, no less than 30 to 50 grams of protein in a meal. And that could be both plant and animal-based protein. So depending on what individuals they feel like resonates most with them. So 30 to 50 grams of protein is a consistent piece and no less than 100 grams of protein a day. That might not be where a woman is right now, but that is something we work towards. Number two is really getting granular about fiber. I think carbohydrates in general have been bastardized in kind of the lay press, and it's important to discern between unprocessed carbohydrates like fruits, vegetables, grains versus processed varieties like bread, pasta, which that's not what I'm recommending for my patients. But
Mhm.
number one, it's polyphenol rich foods, so brightly pigmented fruits and vegetables. I typically will say three vegetables to one piece of fruit because as a culture, we like sweet things. But
Mhm.
I don't believe in fear mongering around fruit. I'm like, my goodness, there's plenty of fiber in the fruit that will slow absorption. Number two is just getting really conscientious about fiber intake. Again, going back to tracking, because the standard American diet right now is anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10 grams total a day. And the research certainly supports 25 to 30 grams. But most people, if they're only at 10 grams a day, trying to rapidly get to 30, they're going to be miserable because their microbes actually have to acclimate. But it's important to identify why fiber is so important because this helps with compliance and patient buy-in. Number one, fiber, when it's consumed, goes through the digestive system, gets to the colon or large intestine where it's fermented. And what is fermented out of that are short chain fatty acids. And these are very important signaling molecules. They're important for insulin sensitivity. They're important for mucus production, which I know for many people, they're like, yuck. And I'm like, no, very important protective mechanism. They're involved in endogenous GLP-1 regulation, so to help us with satiety. But fiber becomes more important because as hormones are declining, we make less short chain fatty acids, and some of them even cross the blood-brain barrier, like butyrate. So number one, fiber, and I typically will say, like, let's figure out where you are first, and then backfill with how much fiber. We should be having some fiber with each meal. Number two is looking at fermented foods. I think we should have some fermented foods with at least two or three of our meals a day. Having a fermented vegetable like in my house right now, we have kimchi, we have sauerkraut, 2 or 3 tablespoons of the meal. We're not talking about copious amounts. Miso, low sugar kombucha, if you tolerate dairy, kefir, or yogurt are really nice options to have. I'm usually pushing the vegetables because I think most of my patients really struggle to get enough into their diet. And then when we're looking at prebiotic or even postbiotic foods, it's really understanding that many of these things like asparagus and onions have prebiotic qualities. And then these postbiotics can come from things like berries or walnuts or strawberries. Some of my patients do need to supplement with things like urolithin A because they just can't produce enough of them on their own. Their microbiome, about 20 to 30% of my patients, or most in general, based on research, can actually produce urolithin A on their own in adequate amount. So getting really targeted, and I usually say once we've dialed in on protein and fiber, those are two big things. The other thing to think about is alcohol. In our culture, there's a big mommy drinking culture. And so I find for a lot of my patients that as they are navigating this transitional time in their lives, alcohol no longer fits into their lifestyle. And
Mhm.
let's be clear, there are no health benefits from alcohol. So I generally recommend eliminating or limiting. If you have a birthday, a holiday, a celebration, that's different. But the days of women drinking half a bottle of wine a night, and this is what patients will admit to me, so they probably are drinking more than that, helping them understand how it disrupts their sleep, blood sugar regulation, et cetera, and understanding that it's a toxin and that's how it's processed in the body. So those are some key themes that I find are helpful. The other thing that I didn't mention about carbohydrates, but I am oftentimes asked, how much carbohydrate? Well,
Mhm.
again, very bio-individual. If you're physically active, you have a lot of lean muscle mass, that is very different than someone who is not metabolically healthy, obese, or overweight. Those individuals probably benefit from limiting the quantity of carbohydrate in a meal. So if you're metabolically healthy, you can probably get away with 30 grams in a meal. If you're not metabolically healthy, obese, really working on fine tuning your metabolic engine, then we're probably looking at, 15 to 20 grams per meal. So that may seem harsh, but I remind people that when we're trying to shift body composition, when we're trying to work on our microbiome, sometimes we have to make changes in the short term that will have long-term benefits.
And then you also mentioned, you're so funny on your Instagram. I saw a post that was about poop. How
Yep.
every woman has to poop every day, and that people don't know that, and people are not on that schedule. So what's going
Mhm.
on with that? All
Yeah,
this good fiber should
yeah.
lead to that habit.
That is very true. It's funny. I had a colleague of mine, a gastroenterologist. He said, Cynthia, stop saying defecate, just say poop. You sound clinical when you say that. So my friends and my family are like embarrassed slash delighted that I'm now just saying poop. But I think when we talk about very basic things about our physiology, whatever we do is what we assume is normal. So if a patient says to me, I poop twice a week, they assume that is normal for them. And I always remind them that the goal is to be going at least once a day. I mean, that is the goal. If you skip a day, don't stress about it. But understanding that defecation or pooping is one way of eliminating toxins from the body, or even getting rid of, we're excreting excess estrogen in our stool. It's helping people understand like this is supposed to be a normal physiologic function. And when my patients are hydrated and they're relaxed enough and they're eating enough fiber, and they're in a position where they're not traveling, I find that most patients are going at least 1 or 2 times a day. But I use it as a barometer, just like other vital signs. Talk to me about your menstrual cycle if you're still cycling. Talk to me about, have you ever been told you have high blood pressure? Talk to me about your bowel movements, because just like babies, their sleep and poop habits govern their entire lives at that stage
Mhm.
of life. I
Mhm.
remind women that we really need to think that elementally about sleep quality and are we pooping every day? Something as simple as being dehydrated. And how many women, like we start losing our thirst receptors, we lose our abilities. Estrogen's declining, our thirst receptors are not as vibrant as they were at 20. So by the time I get dehydrated, I'm really dehydrated. So I think for a lot of patients, it's helping them understand like we do actually, like caffeine does not count. If you're drinking 5 cups of coffee a day and you're having an energy drink, that is not hydration. That is probably contributing to your dehydration. So just thinking about pooping as something that's normal. There's the Bristol stool chart. And I talk to my patients all the time very granularly about, you want to be a 3 or a 4. If you have liquid stools, it means things are moving too quickly through the colon. If they're hard and pebbly, it means it's absorbed, all the water has been reabsorbed and it will contribute to constipation. But ideally, we want it to be you sit on the toilet, you poop within a couple of minutes, and you get off. Don't sit on the toilet. Like I remember, I mean, this is funny, I'm going to date myself, but I had colleagues, physician colleagues, that would hide in the bathroom in the morning after they had their coffee. And I would say to them, you can't spend 15 minutes like reading the newspaper. Like you should, that's actually
Mhm.
not good for your pelvic floor, but kind of reinforcing that pooping should be a fairly effortless activity. But for a lot of individuals, it's not.
Mhm. Very true. I'm in an audience where skin and facial aging has a huge focus. How does the unhealthy gut show up on the skin with inflammation and visual aging and acne, eczema, rosacea?
All the above. So we know that women, as they're transitioning into menopause, are 4 to 5 times more likely to experience autoimmune conditions. So when a woman's telling me about new onset eczema, new onset psoriasis, or undescribed kind of rashes, I'm automatically thinking, okay, what's going on in the gut? We talked about that small intestinal layer is just one cell layer thick. So as estrogen's declining, much more likely to see this. But I remind women the other thing is if you are consuming an ultra processed diet, if there's a lot of inflammation, you're not insulin sensitive, there's a lot of ways the body will communicate via our skin. And so I will sometimes see women with even latent PCOS, so number one endocrine disorder here in the United States, it's not Hashimoto's thyroiditis, it's PCOS. A lot of my
Mm.
PCOS patients will talk about, hair growth they are not thrilled with, a lot of acne, or women are experiencing acne depending on where they are in their cycles. I think there's this common misconception that every woman in menopause needs testosterone. Some of them still have vibrant testosterone levels. So I look at the skin as a mirror of what's going on in the gut microbiome and how we can help support it. So it might be, digging a little deeper. Did someone just recently get prescribed antibiotics and then 2 months later they have a psoriasis patch? Someone's
Mhm.
super stressed out and they're eating excessive amount of highly inflammatory processed foods, and they notice that's when their eczema flares or when their stress levels go up. And we know that women are so much more susceptible to stress. I think that cortisol gets a bad rap, but I remind people that at a very elemental level, like if they measured our cortisols right now as we're having this conversation, it would probably be up a little bit. We're engaged, we're having a conversation, we're happy. But cortisol being high over time can lead to it's catabolic. So you can see muscle breakdown. You can see changes in immune function. You can get more leaky gut. So I'm automatically thinking when someone's having a lot of skin issues, I start to think, are you managing your stress with any degree of effectiveness? Because with that decline in hormones and shifts in neurotransmitters, we may perceive that we're not able to be as effectively managing our stress levels, which can also exacerbate those stress things. I think a lot about eczema. Like my patients with eczema, they'll tell me, oh, I got in a fight with my husband, or I've been stressed out doing a lot of travel. And all of a sudden they've got skin manifestations of what's going on internally because they do a really good job of holding it all inside, but not effectively managing their stress or their emotions.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And it accelerates aging, really, all this
Mhm.
inflammation. We call it inflammaging in our industry too. But
Yes.
I think that people say suddenly in menopause, their skin changes, their collagen levels change, and now their gut changes. My God, we get hit with a lot all at once.
We do. And I also think about, the glycation you get with these high carb, high sugar diets. And sometimes patients will say, well, I feel like until I went into menopause that I was able to, my skin looked plumper. I didn't have as much wrinkling. And then helping them understand like what's changing with estradiol declining, changes in collagen, changes in elastin. But also, are you insulin sensitive and metabolically healthy? My patients that are insulin resistant, their skin looks very different from that glycation, from their sugars being high than individuals that are able to more effectively manage blood sugar regulation at this stage of life.
Mm. Yeah, it's very true. You mentioned a little bit about the immune system, and the gut being such a big organ. I was at this meeting over the weekend, and they said if you lay your GI tract out flat, it's as big as a football field. And that's like our biggest immune organ, right? We have so many immune cells there. So talk a little bit about immunosenescence and like advanced aging of the immune system there.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I was writing the book, and of course, like in our training, we learn about the immune system. Well, now I know it at a different level because the interface between the gut microbiome and our immune system is so interrelated. 70 to 80% of our immune system is housed in the gut. So is it any surprise that as our microbiome is changing in response to all these hormonal fluctuations, I always think about estrogen as being so intricately interwoven with the immune system. And we start seeing alterations in susceptibility to opportunistic infections. If we look at the research, we're more likely to have reduced vaccine effectiveness. So when you go to CVS and you pick up your estrogen patch, it's why they ask you, do you want a pneumonia vaccine? Do you want a shingles vaccine? Do you want a flu vaccine? Every single time, because we acknowledge that as our immune system is aging, we are less apt to be able to fight off those infections, especially viruses. And there's these T helper cells that change the adaptive immune system, the acquired immune system are both aging with us. And it's why, I even think during the pandemic, as much as I can't believe that was 6 years ago, a lot of the individuals that were impacted by, side effects from COVID or died from COVID were older patients because their immune systems were not quite as robust as they once were. And, again, it goes back to that piece about lifestyle, but also hormone replacement therapy and how that can help support the immune system, reduce inflammation. I remind people all the time, our immune system, our ovaries age right along with us from the time
Mhm.
we are born, helping people understand why we seem to be more susceptible to these opportunistic infections, especially viral infections, and why vaccine effectiveness gets reduced quite significantly.
Gosh, that's all bad. What do we do? Are there...
That's why I keep saying HRT, 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 because I really do think that when we look at the data and we look at the way that the immune system is changing so dynamically, the first line of defense and then the acquired immune systems, with that reduction of estrogen, it's like if we're bolstering that back up, maybe not to the levels we were in our 20s or 30s, it's going to allow us to have another layer of protection. I don't pretend to be an immunologist, but as I was looking at it while writing the book and creating analogies to make it easier for listeners to understand, it became clear to me that there's a larger conversation that really needs to be had. Like, as much as it's very important that we talk about heart disease risks and we talk about bone health and we talk about brain health. But I remind everyone, like, everything is interconnected with the gut. So if we're focused on the gut being healthy, that conveys protection to other organ systems in the body as well. Like, we're not siloed off, thankfully. I think, during most of our medical training, we're kind of conditioned, like, here's the renal bucket and here's the pulmonary
Mhm.
bucket. And oh, maybe they're sort of interconnected. At least now we acknowledge they're all interconnected.
Hmm. So just regular hormones, taking an oral estradiol, progesterone, all of those things will systemically benefit the gut. Is
Yeah,
there
I do.
anything like directly that goes to the gut? Any form of hormones that's direct to the gut?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people are probably starting with transdermal estradiol. I know that oral estradiol is a nice option for specific patients. I think a great deal about my patients that have got like elevated LP little a. We know that oral estradiol therapy has some weak PCSK9 inhibiting effects, and so certainly for people that have got elevated LP little a, I know that wasn't the question you were asking, but those are the people I think about, someone that's really wanting to be proactive about prevention of osteoporosis, depending on where they fall, what their bone metrics are looking like. If you look at the standard recommendations right now, we wait until someone's 65. I think that we need to be looking at bone health a lot earlier, especially for young women that are being started in their teens on oral contraceptives or Depo-Provera. There's solid research in particular on Depo, and we don't know the long-term effects on bone beyond that 2 year mark. So I start to think more proactively about, identifying people that are at greater risk and then getting really granular. So yes, transdermal estradiol is a starting point. Obviously, oral estradiol is another option. Oral progesterone, and there's about 20 to 30% of women are intolerant to oral progesterone, and we're now starting to talk about other routes of administration, like even rectal or vaginal progesterone, protecting the uterus and still being absorbed systemically, which we can then kind of confer that that would be beneficial, not just to the uterus, but systemically as well.
So interesting. In aesthetics, we use collagen biostimulators, so they're injectables. They improve the reedy ridges of the skin that thin and atrophy. Is there any such thing in the GI world where your microvilli of your intestinal walls can get somehow boosted to improve? Because I imagine all of that flattens, thins, and is less efficient, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think the best research that I've read is really suggested that estradiol, if we look at the microbiome of a pre-perimenopausal woman versus perimenopause versus menopause, giving HRT, in particular estradiol, can restore some of the diversity, reduction in inflammation, a younger appearance to the microbiome, if you will. Obviously, the microbiome is invisible to the naked eye, but helping people understand that HRT can be an integral component to restoration of tight junctions and other functions in the microbiome itself. So, as I have said over and over again the last few weeks, I do think at some point there will be a primary indication for the gut microbiome with HRT. We're just not there yet. And appropriately, we're focused on bones and brain and heart health, but I think the
Mhm.
microbiome is equally important.
I think so too. Well, any thoughts about what's the first best step for a woman who wants to start working on her gut fixing?
I think something as simple as understanding that digestion starts in the brain. So taking 4 to 5 deep breaths, we really want to be in the parasympathetic nervous system. I think for a lot of women, I used to eat and dictate. I literally would stand in my office and
Mhm.
dictate on charts because I only had so much time. And I'm like, I can eat and dictate. Clearly not in a parasympathetic state while doing that. But for a lot of women,
Mhm.
eating off their kids' plates, eating in the car, eating on the go, 4 to 5 deep breaths at the start of a meal where you are seated is a good way to tell your body we're getting ready to accept food. Because what many people forget at a very basic level is that when we're in the parasympathetic, our body can break down, assimilate, absorb, detoxify. It can't do those things effectively if we are on the go, vis-a-vis standing up and dictating and eating your salad.
Mhm.
That's not going to allow for that. So thinking about 4 to 5 deep breaths before you eat, taking a 5 or 10 minute walk after a meal is going to help with blood sugar regulation. We have GLUT4 transporters in our muscles that will help to scavenge up excess glucose. I also think thoughtfully about like don't overthink your meal. Just let's track your nutrition intake for a week and get a sense of where you are. I find most people are under eating protein significantly and they're
Mhm.
overeating carbohydrates. So oftentimes we need to flip that and just being conscientious about fiber. I'm not talking about a supplement. I'm talking about getting it from lentils or beans or getting it from a piece of fruit or some vegetables is a really great starting point. I think there are some hacks about supplements. Like, as an example, I will sometimes say to my patients, because it's so well tolerated, a tablespoon of fresh ground flax and a tablespoon of fresh ground chia seeds oftentimes will yield not only, it'll bump up their fiber, but it'll help improve the consistency of their stools. So they're going to be
Mhm.
able to poop more effectively. And it's generally not something that's as gas producing. There's a lot of good supplements that are out there, but I think the kind of prevailing methodology here in the United States is I take the supplement and I don't change my lifestyle. And I remind people that we actually need to change the lifestyle. But other kind of key things, I would say majoring the majors, like making sure you get sleep. Like the research is clear that helps the microbiome because we have circadian clocks throughout our digestive system, managing your stress. So again, taking a couple deep breaths before a meal. Those are really easy things that don't require anyone to have any equipment or any special gadgets, just really focused on, those subtleties that can make a big difference in how you feel.
I think that's so interesting. Are there keystone bacteria that are specific to women that are important and different from a male gut keystone?
Yeah, it's interesting. We get imprinted at birth, depending whether we're vaginal delivery or C-section, whether we're breastfed or bottle fed. And it's puberty where it kind of breaks off that we get differentiation in certain types of composition of different keystone bacteria. It's only in menopause that the microbiome for women starts to look more like men. So I think a great deal about Akkermansia, which men have as well, but I think for women is so, so important for reducing inflammation, the insulin sensitivity piece, the endogenous GLP-1 regulation, the mucus production. I think the ongoing research around this anaerobe is really exciting, and so that's one that I'm really interested in, and certainly the research is suggesting that for women is going to be really important as they're making that transition into menopause. To answer your question, we start seeing more inflammatory species in the response to less circulating hormones.
I think the Akkermansia is something I haven't tried. I saw a new supplement release for that, but I was just learning and reading more about how it boosts the mucin production and just I think these bacteria that colonize and live with us versus the ones that we just pop in as probiotic pills are the ones that are going to really change our foundational health, right? So,
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's helpful for people to understand that supplements definitely have a place, but we just want to be strategic because it is easy in the health and wellness space to suddenly just say, hey, oh, that's that new supplement. I need to try that. But in essence, just being really strategic. And I think as we have more microbiome mapping and more microbiome testing, we can get really granular about our own needs, our own bio-individual needs. I always say the power of the N of one, really looking at what makes you personally feel good. Like we can have some overarching themes but that granular nature of the power of the N of one, or as I refer to, like this is anecdotally what I've seen in practice, but I've not yet seen replicated in research. I think that's important information.
I think so too. And do you think women start to feel better once, like, does the brain fog lift if you do get your gut in order? Does the mood change? So are there some positives to what we can expect here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really goes back to like, what are your pain points? For a lot of my women, it's they're focused myopically on weight loss resistance, but then they realize, oh, as my gut microbiome starts to shift and change, I have more energy. I'm able to focus more on task. I feel like I have more mental clarity. I feel like my mood is improved. Even women will say, oh, I never would have diagnosed myself or thought I had, like low mood, a little bit of anhedonia or mild underlying anxiety, but once they start changing what they're doing, that can translate into very subtle shifts. I've had women who were convinced they had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We've tested for it, we've confirmed it's there. And while working on the microbiome as that is resolving, because we should not have bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine, that in and of itself drives a lot of the symptoms. All of a sudden, they're like, I'm no longer anxious. I'm able to sleep better. Just
Mhm.
about any woman who tells me she doesn't sleep well, it is not just a hormone issue. It is very likely a reflection of low level or even moderate level inflammation that's being transmitted to the brain. So, a lot of brain fog, a lot of mood issues can be a reflection of that bidirectional relationship via the vagus nerve between the gut and the brain. Sometimes it's not just about you need an antidepressant, although let me be clear, some women do need an antidepressant or do need anti-anxiety medicines or do need to have their ADD treated, but it can be magnified or worsened if their gut is not healthy.
Very true. For the current population of all the GLP-1 patients out there, how is their gut being affected? And is there anything preventative that they need to do other than the fiber and the protein?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the conversation right now is strength training and protein because, it's so clear that, in fact, there was a physician on another friend's podcast talking about how she's starting to see all this anorexia type behavior that is coming out of the overuse of GLP-1. So, from my perspective, I think that what's exciting about the GLP-1s in terms of the microbiome is it's, improving insulin sensitivity, it's changing the constituency. So we're getting less inflammatory species, more restoration of those keystone bacteria. But I think from the perspective of body composition improvement, mood improvement, a lot of these women, if they're concurrently taking HRT, they're feeling better, they're feeling more like themselves. And so I think it is I look at peptides as the icing on the cake. I always say that, of course, I want to be sensitive to whatever someone's goals are, but the lifestyle piece is foundational. And then we're layering in the other pieces. We never want women to be suffering, but in some instances, it's kind of portrayed that you put someone on a peptide like a GLP-1, you give them HRT, and that fixes everything else. And I always say you really do still have to make those lifestyle changes because how many women I know are on HRT and a peptide and they'll say, I'm still not feeling better. I may look better, but I don't feel better. And so I think it really
Mhm.
speaks to women need a very comprehensive approach to kind of moving the needle in middle age.
Yeah, we're very complicated.
Yes,
We
we
are.
are. Our physiology is definitely complicated, but not in a bad way, in a good way.
Are there any probiotics that are your favorite or
I definitely, I'm a fan of pendulums, Akkermansia, hopefully I can say that name, but they're the ones that seem to have perfected this anaerobe environment to be able to make that effective. I think it really depends. I mean, I like spore-based probiotics if I feel like they're indicated. There's definitely some good soil-based ones, especially for patients. Like as an example, someone needs to go, is appropriately prescribed an antibiotic, needs to be on an antibiotic, and we know what that can potentially lead to. There's some really good soil-based probiotics that are specific for that. They're higher dose, as well as adding in like Sac boulardii, which is a beneficial yeast, away from the antibiotic, has pretty solid research. So, like in terms of like big level things, the answer is yes, but I like to be really specific about it and making sure they're still eating fermented foods because I feel like that's important. It's like we're just hitting it from two different ends. And the other thing that you had mentioned earlier, which is correct, the reason why you have to take the probiotic every day is that you need to seed on a daily basis. It's not like you take the probiotic once a week and then you don't have to take another probiotic. It's on a daily basis. We need to seed the microbiome. So you're assuming that if all things are working effectively, it's going through the digestive system, goes to the large intestine, it seeds there, and then whatever is not being utilized is pooped out of the body.
Did you mention that yeast again? And how do you take it?
Yeah, so it's Sac Boulardii, so Saccharomyces boulardii. Usually taken twice a day, really easy. It's you can get it where other supplements are sold, but that's pretty much a kind of a front line. If someone's taking antibiotics, we take it opposite. So if they're taking antibiotics twice a day, BID, I might dose it with them, like you take it with lunch and then you take it before bed, and that can be helpful for helping, I would say, helping to offset some of the effects of killing off not just the, pathogenic bacteria, but also the beneficial bacteria as well.
Interesting, because a lot of times you go on antibiotics and you get a yeast infection, a vaginal one. Then
Yep.
you're taking yeast
Yes, because
to
it's
keep
killing
your
off.
microbiome.
Yeah. And what I think some people don't know is that we have yeast in our body. It's when the overgrowth is, when you kill off the beneficial bacteria, you get the imbalance with the yeast. So the yeast is kind of overpowering the bacteria, and that becomes problematic, whether it's thrush in the mouth or candidiasis in the vagina, or hopefully not SIFO, which is small intestinal fungal overgrowth. But that tends to be, I look at that as that's an incredibly opportunistic infection. But yes, any of these imbalances can drive symptoms, make people feel worse for sure.
Well, I'm so excited for your book, The Menopause Gut, to hit. Is it available now, or tell us about the launch of the book so people can learn more?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the Menopause Gut will officially, it's on pre-sale right now, anywhere you can purchase books, but the official publication date is April 28th. So it will be out very, very soon. Really proud of the book, and the feedback we've been getting has been phenomenal. So I feel like this is a book that is very timely. It dovetails nicely into the existing perimenopause and menopause books that are out there. And it's really the love letter to women. It's the book I wish I had 10 years ago, but didn't.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. And congratulations on such an exciting, like it's such a feat to write a book and then to put all that thinking into the universe. You're going to help a lot of people.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Cynthia, where can people find you if they want to reach out or learn more?
Yeah, probably easiest to go to my website. So it's www.cynthiathurlow.com. If you go to the top banner, you can order the book, and there are pre-sale bonuses. They're actually bonuses you will want as opposed to another pantry guide, which no one needs. But I'm active across social media, probably most active on Instagram, although my team would like me to be active everywhere. I love Substack. That's kind of been a new foray for me. You can get an idea of what I'm thinking about on a deeper level. And then, of course, my podcast, Everyday Wellness, which is probably one of my favorite things that I do within my business.
Well, that's amazing. Okay, I'd love to come on your podcast and we can talk
Absolutely.
about skin and
Love that.
microbiome there.
I love that.
Yeah, well, guys, that's it for now. I hope you learned a ton about the GI tract in women and how it changes and it's different for women. And it's going to help you to improve your microbiome as you age. And menopausally, for sure, there's more than just thinking about night sweats and brain fog. You got to think about the gut. That's it for now, guys. Don't forget to find me on my Instagram. It's Beauty by Dr. K. That's DRKAY. And our website is the same. It's beautybydrk.com. And that's where you can find our new peptide wellness line, which is so great for skin. You guys have everything at home, the retin A, the vitamin C. You don't have NAD precursors, mitochondrial boosters, glutathione, GHK copper, and my own collagen elastin tripeptide complex. So, Cynthia, I got to send you some.
I love
And
it.
yeah, that's it for now, guys. Don't forget to tune in on Tuesdays for a longer podcast and every Friday for a 5-minute Friday. Love you and stay beautiful.